For half a century, Demi Moore was a silent shadow amidst a world full of glamorous lies. A woman of action with piercing eyes that see right through the soul, she witnessed the dark corners that the camera lens intentionally avoided. But today isn't about her. It is for Molly Ringwald, the star who burned too fast, only to fade into a mysterious night. Behind her captivating smile that charmed millions, Molly Ringwald actually lived a nightmare orchestrated by the wolves in human clothing of this industry. While the world saw an idol, Demi Moore only saw a prisoner. Today, the silence is officially broken as we reopen this forbidden file, exposing the 30 dark truths leading to her final tragedy. The media's narrative all this time may not be wrong, but it is merely the tip of a perilous iceberg. Was her downfall a perfect setup from the beginning, or just a pawn sacrificed in a larger game, and who truly pulled the strings when the spotlight died? Please watch this video closely to understand the absolute truth about Molly Ringwald through the perspective of Demi Moore. Welcome to my video. John Hughes, the manipulative architect. Peeling back the cinematic magic of the 1980s reveals a deeply unsettling reality about the acclaimed director. He wasn't trembling from chemical withdrawals, but from a pathological, obsessive need for absolute control over his teenage muses. Demi Moore's leaked 1985 chat logs exposed that Hughes's genius was entirely parasitic. He built his empire by acting as a faux father figure, coaxing vulnerable young stars into confessing their deepest insecurities, family traumas, and private missteps. These weren't just character studies. They were meticulously cataloged files of blackmail. When the cameras stopped rolling, Hughes would retreat to his private trailer, sweating, pacing, and hyperventilating in sheer panic if he felt he was losing his iron grip on his cast's secrets. There was a horrifying, hushed incident on set when Molly Ringwald, exhausted by his invasive psychological games, politely refused to incorporate a deeply personal family struggle into a scene. Instead of directing her like a professional, Hughes suffered a complete meltdown. He threw a humiliating, tearful tantrum, threatening to feed her private struggles to the ruthless tabloid press if she didn't comply. It was the reaction of a cornered, spoiled child, completely shattering the myth of the benevolent cinematic warrior. He was a hollow vessel, a middle-aged man desperately mimicking the youthful authenticity that naturally radiated from Molly. He possessed no original voice. He merely stole hers, packaged it, and sold it. His entire legacy was built on the terrifying leverage he held over teenagers who were too young to understand they were being extorted. Could a man who completely unravels without the stolen pain of vulnerable youth truly be considered a legendary artist? Or is he merely a pathetic illusionist trapped in a circus of his own making? Andrew McCarthy, the arrogant fraud. Behind the brooding gaze and the carefully manufactured image of the serious, intellectual actor hid a man terrified of his own mediocrity. Andrew McCarthy desperately positioned himself above the teenage fray, demanding to be seen as a theatrical powerhouse with unparalleled depth. However, Demi Moore's explosive transcripts reveal that his untouchable aura was nothing but a fragile, negotiated lie. McCarthy's career was not sustained by raw talent, but by his quiet, cowardly complicity in the studio's extortion ring. The most humiliating blow to his massive ego occurred during a closed-door rehearsal. Armed with his pretentious, overanalyzed technique, McCarthy was completely decimated by Molly Ringwald's effortless, visceral brilliance. He froze, humiliated and exposed as a rigid amateur before a natural prodigy. To heal his bruised ego and eliminate the threat she posed, he retreated to the shadows, engaging in a campaign of psychological sabotage. He actively collaborated with the blackmailers, feeding them observations about his co-star's vulnerabilities. He thrived on the resulting chaos, deliberately intimidating younger, less experienced actors on set. By ensuring his scene partners were anxious, sleep-deprived, and terrified of what the tabloids might publish, he artificially elevated his own mediocre performances. He was a predator draped in tweed, hiding his sickening behavior and absolute lack of charisma behind a wall of manufactured intellectual superiority. When the mask of the brooding artist is violently ripped away, what remains? A respected master of the craft, or merely a vindictive coward who torments the vulnerable to disguise his own crippling inadequacy? Anjelica Huston, the nepotistic enforcer. Perhaps the most insidious force working against Molly Ringwald was not a peer, but the embodiment of Hollywood's deeply entrenched, aristocratic rot. Anjelica Huston, born into cinematic royalty, represented the old guard, a rigid, nepotistic establishment terrified by the uncontrollable, independent power of the youth movement Molly spearheaded. Huston was the ultimate beneficiary of a corrupt system, an actress who bypassed the brutal struggles of the industry by simply inheriting her throne. Demi Moore's leaked conversations expose Huston as the silent enforcer of the extortion ring, the powerful connection who ensured the blackmail material could actually destroy careers. She despised Molly's organic, explosive popularity. When Molly began quietly gathering evidence to expose the executives, Huston was deployed to crush her. The cruelty Molly endured under this regime was suffocating. To protect her friend's secrets from being leaked to the press by Huston's powerful network, Molly was forced into artistic submission. She had to intentionally decline prestigious, complex roles, deliberately dulling her own shine so that establishment figures like Huston could continue to win the awards and dominate the critical conversation. Huston would stand at podiums, delivering elegant, empty speeches about the purity of cinema, while privately acting as the velvet-gloved fist of an extortion syndicate. She lived a life of untouchable luxury, entirely insulated by a system that actively bled young stars dry. She was the ultimate symbol of profound injustice, a woman who possessed a fraction of Molly's cultural resonance but wielded absolute, unearned power to bury her. Have you ever stopped to wonder how many once-in-a-generation talents like Molly Ringwald were ruthlessly buried alive, solely to pave the way for these untalented, privileged parasites to steal the spotlight? 30 brutal facts about Molly Ringwald. Molly Ringwald and her raw instinct. Behind the carefully curated lighting and the quintessential 80s synth-pop soundtracks, Molly possessed an acting instinct that was practically supernatural. She didn't just read lines. She consumed the emotional reality of a scene so completely that seasoned cinematographers would often miss her most brilliant micro-expressions. While the industry manufactured plastic teen idols, Molly was a visceral powerhouse, tapping into a well of raw, unpolished humanity that no director could genuinely take credit for. Her talent was a terrifying mirror held up to an industry built on artifice. Molly Ringwald and the Golden Heart. In a cutthroat environment where young actors were encouraged to backstab each other for screen time, Molly was an anomaly of profound kindness. She actively used her leverage to protect vulnerable extras and minor characters from the predatory behavior of the studio executives. While the fraudulent elites reveled in their fabricated authority, Molly was known to sit with the crew, offering genuine warmth and shielding the weaker targets from the extortion ring's psychological warfare. Demi Moore and the absolute respect. Among the chaotic web of lies and forced rivalries, Demi Moore stood as the silent observer, and she harbored absolute respect for only one person. Demi saw through the bravado of the male leads and the nepotistic arrogance of the old guard. To the silent guardian, Molly was the sole authentic artist of their generation, the only one who commanded genuine reverence, a queen who wore a crown of thorns while the jesters danced for the studio's favor. The friendship and the shattered dream. Behind closed doors, away from the prying eyes of their handlers, Molly and Demi harbored a revolutionary dream. They were secretly laying the groundwork to build their own independent production company, a safe haven where young actors could work without the threat of blackmail and exploitation. It was a beautiful, dangerous vision of dismantling the system from the outside, a dream ultimately shattered when the syndicate accelerated their campaign of destruction against Molly. The class and the unreachable aura. When you strip away the nostalgia and look at the raw footage, the difference in sheer class is staggering. Molly operated on an entirely different stratosphere. While her peers were desperately trying to memorize Hughes's manipulative dialogue or begging for Huston's scraps of approval, Molly breathed life into cinema. She possessed an unreachable aura, a transcendent quality that made the executives realize they could never truly own her, only temporarily contain her. The legacy and the brilliant beginning. Her early achievements did not just break box office records, they ignited a cultural revolution. She single-handedly birthed the modern teen genre, proving that the adolescent experience was worthy of serious cinematic exploration. Her brilliant beginning generated billions of dollars for a system that despised her independence, forcing an entire industry to pivot and profit off the very demographic she championed. Why did a genius with a golden heart become a thorn in the side of the powerful? The answer lies right here. The fame and the ultimate solitude. Being the most famous teenager on the planet was a gilded cage of absolute isolation. Molly was surrounded by thousands of screaming fans and hundreds of industry professionals, yet she had absolutely no one she could truly trust. Every manager, publicist, and stylist was a potential informant for the blackmail ring. Her immense fame became a weapon used against her, a solitary confinement cell decorated with magazine covers and platinum records. The system and the corporate bloodsuckers. The environment she inhabited was entirely populated by parasites. From the executives demanding she work 18-hour days to the publicists selling her private tears to the tabloids, she was surrounded by bloodsuckers desperate to drain her cultural relevance for their financial gain. They didn't view her as a human being. They viewed her as a lucrative intellectual property that needed to be aggressively milked before it expired. The dark forces and the indecent proposal. The true turning point occurred behind the mahogany doors of the studio boardrooms. Molly was cornered by the elite syndicate and handed a terrifying ultimatum: surrender her creative autonomy, become a permanent, silent pawn in their blackmail scheme, and help lure new, younger actors into the trap or face absolute professional annihilation. It was a dirty, unforgivable proposal designed to break her spirit and absorb her into their corrupt machinery. The bravery and the deadly refusal. Where others would have bowed their heads to secure their multi-million-dollar contracts, Molly's sheer stubbornness and unyielding self-respect took over. She looked the architects of her own career in the eye and delivered a definitive, uncompromising no. She refused to become a predator. This deadly refusal marked the exact moment the studio shifted its vast resources from promoting her to actively orchestrating her downfall. The psychology and the first crack. The immense weight of carrying her own trauma while trying to shield her peers eventually took its toll. Away from the flashing cameras, the first signs of deep psychological exhaustion began to show. Demi witnessed the quiet, devastating moments, the shaking hands, the hollow stares into the dressing room mirrors, the profound, bone-deep weariness of a girl fighting a war against an invisible, omnipotent enemy that the public never even knew existed. The environment and the silent boycott. Almost overnight, the very industry that crowned her began a systematic, invisible quarantine. Scripts stopped arriving. Favorable press turned into vicious rumors of her being difficult and demanding. Directors who once begged for her time suddenly refused to take her calls. It was a chilling, perfectly coordinated silent boycott designed to starve her of her art and force her to crawl back to the syndicate in desperation. When you choose to stand tall among wolves, what is the price you must pay? The next truth will make you shudder. The darkness and the midnight calls. The psychological warfare escalated beyond the studio lots. Molly's private sanctuary was invaded. She began receiving anonymous, menacing phone calls in the dead of night. Heavy breathing, subtle threats about her family, chilling reminders that they knew exactly where she slept. It was a calculated campaign of terror to ensure she never felt safe. designed to drive her into a state of permanent, debilitating anxiety. The behavior and the necessary paranoia. Her entire way of life had to change. The bubbly, accessible star morphed into a hypervigilant survivor. She began thoroughly sweeping her hotel rooms for listening devices, constantly changing her daily routes, and even carrying a concealed audio recorder to every industry meeting. What the media lazily painted as diva behavior was, in reality, the necessary paranoia of a woman who knew she was actively being hunted by powerful predators. The accident and the assassination rehearsal. A few months before she was effectively exiled from Hollywood, a horrific mishap occurred on set. A heavy lighting rig crashed mere inches from where she was supposed to be standing. The studio quickly buried the incident as a logistical error, but Demi and Molly knew the terrifying truth. It was a meticulously planned warning, a physical manifestation of the syndicate's power, proving they could eliminate her and make it look like a tragic accident. The intuition and the early last words. In her final months within the system, Molly's demeanor changed. She spoke with a haunting finality. She began giving away cherished personal items to the few crew members she trusted and leaving cryptic, heartbreaking notes in Demi's trailer. Her intuition was razor-sharp. She was effectively delivering her last words, preparing for a sudden, forced disappearance from the world she had built. The enemy and the closing circle. The surveillance became brazen. Strange cars idled outside her Los Angeles home. Unfamiliar men with cameras appeared at her private dinners. The enemy was no longer hiding in the shadows. They were tightening the noose, visually demonstrating that she was trapped in an inescapable perimeter. The psychological suffocation was immense, a daily reminder that she was a prisoner in an open-air cell. The health and the mysterious decline. The vibrant, energetic teenager began to physically wither. She suffered from chronic migraines, unexplained weight loss, and terrifying bouts of weakness. While some whispered about eating disorders, the darker, far more sinister truth suspected by those close to her was slow, deliberate poisoning, not with lethal chemicals, but with highly concentrated stress inducers or microdoses of sedatives slipped into her food by compromised handlers to keep her docile and exhausted. The trust and the painful betrayal. The final, crushing blow came from within. Molly discovered that her closest confidant, a personal assistant she treated like a sister, had been on the syndicate's payroll the entire time. Every private conversation, every strategic move, every tear shed in secret had been immediately relayed back to the executives. This absolute betrayal shattered her remaining faith in humanity, proving that the rot had infiltrated her innermost sanctum. The destiny and the final day. The 24 hours leading up to her definitive break from the American studio system were suffocating. The atmosphere was incredibly tense, filled with canceled meetings, aggressive lawyers, and the palpable presence of studio fixers pacing outside her door. It was the day destiny arrived, the day she realized that to survive with her soul intact, she had to completely sever ties with the empire she had helped construct. The fear in her eyes was not from illness or failure. She knew the grim reaper of her career was coming. What really happened on that fateful night? The time and the deadly gap. There is a glaring, unexplained gap in the timeline of her career's sudden halt. Hours where she was supposedly negotiating were actually spent locked in a room with top-tier fixers, being threatened with absolute ruin if she ever spoke the truth. This was the deadly gap where her narrative was violently ripped from her hands and handed over to the PR machine to be rewritten. The scene and the perfect setup. Before she even boarded a plane to flee to Europe, the studio had already meticulously sterilized the crime scene of her career. They planted stories in major publications, scrubbed her name from future projects, and instructed their remaining stars on exactly what to say. It was a perfect, seamless setup, transforming a brave rebellion into a pathetic tale of a star who simply lost her touch. The forensics and the fake report. The media's post-mortem on Molly Ringwald's career was a masterclass in deception. The official PR reports cited changing audience tastes, bad script choices, and personal burnout. It was a completely fabricated autopsy. The real cause of death for her Hollywood reign was not a natural decline. It was a targeted, systematic assassination of her character and bankability by executives who feared her unyielding independence. The weapon and the invisible poison. The syndicate didn't use bullets, they used the invisible poison of public perception. By planting insidious, untraceable rumors, calling her difficult, demanding, and delusional, they slowly poisoned the well of public goodwill. It was the work of highly paid, professional character assassins who knew exactly how to destroy a woman's credibility without leaving a single fingerprint behind. The witness and the bought silence. The most horrifying aspect was the deafening silence of her peers. Everyone who witnessed the abuse, everyone who knew about the blackmail ring, suddenly developed collective amnesia. The studio bought their silence with lucrative multi-picture deals, magazine covers, and the promise of protection. The witnesses were bribed into complicity, trading Molly's truth for their own hollow superstardom. The forgotten peers and the blood curse. Molly's exile acted as a terrifying blood curse on the remaining young stars. Anyone who dared to ask questions, anyone who tried to maintain contact with her, was immediately targeted by the same extortion machinery. Her disappearance was used as a brutal cautionary tale, a permanent ghost haunting the industry to ensure that no one would ever dare to challenge the power structure again. The culprit and the faceless ghost. The true masterminds behind her downfall, the studio heads, the elite financiers, the architects of the blackmail ring, remained entirely untouched. They hid behind a labyrinth of legal teams and NDA agreements, operating as faceless ghosts who manipulated the puppets from the safety of their ivory towers, forever shielded from the consequences of the lives they destroyed. The witness and the reason for survival. Why did Demi Moore stay silent? Why did she play the game for half a century, pretending not to see the blood on the walls? It was a calculated, agonizing decision of survival. She had to become powerful enough, untouchable enough, to eventually blow the whistle without being crushed herself. She swallowed the poison of complicity for decades, waiting for the precise moment to reopen the file and strike back. The justice and the final truth. Let us be absolutely clear. Molly Ringwald did not fade away. She was executed. This was a professional assassination because her spirit was simply too powerful, too authentic, and too defiant to be controlled by a corrupt system. The final truth is that her departure was not a defeat, but a monumental act of self-preservation and moral victory over an industry built on human sacrifice. The history and the immortality. They managed to destroy her physical dominance over the box office, but they unwittingly cemented her legend. Her refusal to break, her silent dignity in exile, turned her from a mere actress into an immortal symbol of rebellion. Her physical presence may have been erased from the marquees, but her unyielding spirit remains an indestructible force. They killed her physical presence on screen, but did they know this unjust execution would make the truth immortal? Time is the fairest judge, and the final verdict has been pronounced. Look, what happened to those who harmed Molly Ringwald? Some lost their reputations, fading into the pathetic obscurity they always secretly feared, stripped of the unearned power they once wielded. Others became a laughingstock, their manufactured personas crumbling under the crushing weight of their own mediocrity and arrogance. The tyrannical empire of lies and extortion that John Hughes, Andrew McCarthy, and Anjelica Huston helped maintain has ultimately collapsed, exposing them not as legendary artists, but as cowardly enforcers of a sickening syndicate. But Demi Moore is still here, standing firm like a rock amidst the rapids, keeping the oath to preserve the truth. Through decades of superficial glitz and heavily guarded secrets, she carried the heavy burden of this knowledge, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Molly Ringwald did not die of a fading career or natural professional burnout. She fell like a warrior because she dared to say no to absolute tyranny. She refused to trade the souls of her peers for a star on the Walk of Fame. Her sacrifice washed away the decades of PR-driven lies, leaving an immortal legacy of fierce independence that no corporate power, no matter how ruthless or well-funded, can ever erase. She remains the true, unbroken heart of her generation. The file is open. The truth is now in your hands. Do not let superficial news headlines and carefully crafted studio narratives deceive you for another day. The monsters of the past are finally being dragged into the light, and the silenced voices are roaring back to life. If you want to continue the journey of unearthing the most shocking secrets in history, click subscribe and leave a comment below. The truth is still ahead.